Welcome to Nourish MD, Doctor Dietitian Dialogues, where doctors and dietitians empower you about your health and discuss and provide a better path to health and wellness. Proudly presented by Concierge Medical Practice Private Physicians Medical Associates, PPMA, with your hosts, Registered Dietitians and Nutritionist, Lauren Papanos and Romana Brennan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Nourish MD's Doctor Dietitian Dialogues. My name's Romana. I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Lauren. I'm your other host.
Today, we have a great conversation following our interview where we discussed environmental allergies, allergy testing, as well as sinusitis. So be sure to catch that one. It's our previous episode. But today, we're going to be diving deeper into nutrition and lifestyle strategies to help support allergies, histamine response, inflammation, and some other topics that we're really excited to dive in with you today. But again, be sure to check out that interview if you haven't already. Another really interesting interview that relates to this topic of inflammation, autoimmunity, is our interview with Dr. Boz from last month. So be sure to check out both of those interviews, as well as the conversations that Lauren and I had following the conversation with Dr. Boz. All right, so let's just jump into it. And we're going to first touch on immune support and how really immune support is pivotal in this topic of allergies and histamine response and things of that sort. So inflammation in general really does have a direct effect on our liver detoxification system. Inflammation can both come from and also contribute to issues with gut health. So whether you have dysbiosis of the organisms within your gut, that dysbiosis in and of itself and those microbes can fuel inflammation. Similarly, if we have other inflammation in the body that's stemming from other parts of the body, that can also contribute to kind of shifting this environment within the gut. So challenges with gut health, as well as the natural detoxification system, this innate detoxification that is directed by our liver. If we have any issues with that, that can also contribute to inflammation and can further fuel inflammation, which can drive allergies. So again, if you haven't listened to our anti-inflammatory diet strategies episode, that's a really great one to get a better sense of some additional root causes of inflammation, how you can help identify if inflammation is something that you're dealing with that's potentially fueling some of your chronic health conditions. But I want to take a little bit more time today to talk about the importance of liver detoxification. So again, our liver already does this. This is an innate role, innate job of our liver, and detoxification happens in a couple of different phases. The first phase, we really need to take all of these different toxins, most of which they are fat soluble, and we need to convert them into water soluble toxins in order for them to actually be excreted from the body. So during that first and second phase, these toxins become very volatile, all the more important for this process to happen to completion. We don't just want to go halfway because those chemicals that are produced can be very harmful for the system. So both from phase 1 and phase 2, very important for that process to happen seamlessly. And then phase 3 being actually elimination. Making sure that we're going to the bathroom daily is a really important place to start because we don't want to upregulate our detoxification higher up in the cascade area so that we're pushing more down the line if we're not eliminating. So we like to start literally and figuratively on the back end of things and make sure that we're going to the bathroom at least once a day. And, everyone's a little bit different, but if you're going to the bathroom every other day, even if that's the normal for you, that's not what we would consider normal, not what we would consider regular bowel movements. So we want to make sure that we can implement any kind of constipation support. Things like aloe vera can be very helpful, magnesium citrate, things of that sort. Also making sure that you're consuming enough potassium-rich foods, aloe vera being a good source of potassium, which is why it's often recommended for that. Again, just ensuring that we're optimizing detoxification from all sides of the spectrum. We really want to make sure that our liver is fully supported, that detoxification process is optimized. And some things that can impact this, there's genetic factors that can make you slightly slower detoxifier, but genetics aren't everything. So beyond that, especially if we're on a number of medications. Some of these pharmaceuticals can have a heavier toll on the liver. Our liver is really where everything is being detoxified, whether that's inputs from our environment, from the foods we're eating, from the medications that we're taking. So all of these things are things that can kind of slow down detoxification. So again, it's not a matter of doing anything that our body doesn't already do, but there are countless of nutrition, lifestyle factors that we can implement to really support this detoxification and really optimize this process from a nutrition standpoint, really making sure that you're having enough antioxidants, amino acids, bitter foods, things of that sort to make sure that we're giving our liver all of the inputs that it needs to make sure that these chemical reactions can happen appropriately, that we're optimizing liver function.
Romana, what are some examples of amino acids and bitter foods?
Amino acids are these building blocks of proteins. So if we are ensuring that we're getting enough protein-rich foods from animal-based sources as well as plant-based sources. So our plant-based sources of proteins are what we call incomplete proteins, meaning that they do not have all 9 essential amino acids. We really want to make sure that we're getting this complex of all of our essential amino acids because that's what our body needs to fuel the liver function, to fuel these other processes happening in other body tissues as well. So ensuring that we're getting enough amino acids like glycine, glutamine, tryptophan, things of that sort. And we can do so by getting enough protein in the diet. And then our bitter foods, some examples of that, lemons, limes, grapefruit, dandelion, whether you're having dandelion greens, dandelion tea, things of that sort, as well as arugula, beets, things like that. Some of my favorite bitter food sources. You can also just use the digestive bitters or similar to what they might put in a cocktail, for example, all those kind of aromatic bitters. We can always add some of that to a small amount of water before your meal. So touching on the role of gut health and how the gut plays a role in our immune system. So about 80%, somewhere between 70 and 80% of immune cells in our entire body are actually housed in the gut. We have different gut tissue, but within our gut lining, we have immune cells. So a lot of this inflammatory response that is triggered by our immune system can actually come from the gut. So our gut microbes play an important role in this. Also, the integrity of our gut plays an important role in this. When it comes to the immune histamine connection, we want to make sure that our gut microbiome is within balance, because if we have some of these gut microbes that actually are histamine producers, if some of those microbes are too high, then we can have additional histamine issues. That can be how we're getting histamines into our body, not just from the environment, not just from the foods that we're eating or just what's being produced by our actual cells, but also the histamines that are being produced by these microbes in the gut. And just as I had mentioned that our gut integrity plays an important role in this as well, leaky gut or intestinal permeability, that also increases issues with histamines because, and I know Lauren and I did part 1 and part 2 of our gut health series where we talk in more detail about leaky gut, about intestinal permeability, but essentially it's the phenomenon where what's called our tight junctions, they tend to loosen. So we have some spaces between these tight junctions in the lining of our gut, and it's only 1 cell thick. So if we have loosening in these junctions, now our lining of our intestine is kind of perforated in a sense. So that in and of itself can allow toxins, proteins, things of that sort to essentially escape the GI tract. And now those are in the bloodstream, which can sound the alert bell and create an inflammatory response because our body's recognizing, wait a second, these aren't supposed to be here. This is not supposed to be in the blood. So then anything that has come through that lining now is a trigger for this inflammation. So that's just a couple of ways that the gut can be implicated in our immune response. So Lauren, why don't we dive even deeper into histamines? I talked a little bit about the role of the liver, the role of the gut, but what are some symptoms that someone might be dealing with histamine response? And can you talk us through a little bit more of how can we decrease our histamine load, how our body's producing histamines?
Yeah. So just kind of like taking a step back a bit, histamine is a normal part of the immune system response and a normal part of the inflammatory response by our immune system. So that's why we're really honing in on the topic of histamine within this discussion of allergies and the immune system, because it's what most people kind of experience as like the side effect of immune activation and of allergy type issues. So if you have issues with histamine, you probably know it. You probably had them lifelong or for a significant period of time. These can be everything from like allergy and sinus issues, sinusitis, frequent sinus infections. We talked a little bit about this in our podcast interview with Dr. Oliaei. You also could experience more subliminal symptoms, which might be headaches. If you are still in your premenopausal years, then especially if you're noticing these headaches are worse around the midway point, around ovulation, and again, right before you start your period, those tend to be more histamine problematic time periods because of the liberation of histamine from our mast cells that occurs with these natural hormonal fluctuations. If you are postmenopausal, then you maybe have even noticed that you had worse histamine issues when you were younger, but they've gotten maybe a little bit better as you've gotten older because you don't have these strong hormone fluctuations happening. You could experience at any age or any sex, you could experience issues with heat intolerance or getting like a very red, kind of like blood flowing to a certain area when you exercise or say if you shower. Some people with histamine issues, they can't tolerate large amounts of heat exposure like sauna or hot baths and things. They feel really ill, lightheaded, and just more sick than they did before. And then you might also notice that you have issues like itchiness, rashes, especially in the evening time before bed. There tends to be like a cyclical circadian rhythm effect of histamine that tends to be more problematic when we're going to bed. And we see histamine issues primarily in people that have pre-existing autoimmune conditions. So if you know that you have some type of autoimmunity and you've experienced these symptoms before, it's highly likely that there's some type of what we call like histamine intolerance that's going on. Some people, there's a spectrum, right? It can be just histamine intolerance. And then there can be all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is what we call mast cell activation syndrome or MCAS. Now, there's a couple of different strategies that we take with histamine. The first is that we want to decrease the amount of histamine load. And this isn't generally something we have to do forever, but for the short term, while we're trying to support the immune system, we need to decrease the amount of exposure. So we want to look at is how many high histamine foods and environmental triggers are coming about in your day to day. A lot of the food things are much easier to control than say like the environmental things, right? Especially if it's springtime or you live in a certain area, you're probably not going to be able to control that much other than maybe having like an air filter, not going to grasses that you know that you're allergic to, so on and so forth. But when it comes to the high histamine foods, we want to look at is reducing anything that is made from vinegar or that has a high vinegar content. We also want to look at reducing things that are fermented or pickled. Typically, people do a little bit better with pickled things. So like pickled vegetables tend to be a little bit less problematic than do fermented foods. Fermented foods would be things like kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, kefir. So if you eat these and you notice you don't feel good, you're like, these are supposed to make me feel good, but I actually feel worse. It's probably because you're having a histamine response to them. This can also occur with leftover meats. And so when you cook proteins or meat, animal proteins, and they refrigerate, they actually produce more histamine. So you might notice you feel okay if you eat something fresh, but if it's been in the fridge for 3 days, that's where you notice symptoms. There's also certain plant products that some people are very sensitive to. These can include certain citrus fruits, avocados, tomatoes. Everyone's sensitivity level is different. I find the fermented and vinegar foods to be the most problematic for people kind of across the board. And then alcohol. So if you notice that when you drink like wine, beer, especially wine, it tends to be the most problematic, you get a big headache, you feel terrible the next day, you get a ton of flushing, you get like anxiety, heart palpitations, really bad digestive issues. You probably have some histamine stuff going on because all alcohol is fermented, right? And so it tends to be very high in histamine. So those are just some things that we can look at eliminating and being mindful of to reduce this histamine response. And while we are eliminating these things, there's also some support tools that we can use through supplementation and like herbal type techniques to be able to help stabilize our mast cells, which ultimately helps to be able to reduce the amount of this histamine that is liberated or released from the mast cells. Now, all of these things are in a little bit of like band-aid approaches. They're more natural strategies than using something like Benadryl or a common antihistamine. But at the end of the day, we still want to look at addressing the things that Romana talked about initially, which is what's going on in the gut, what's going on in the liver that's causing us to have issues with histamine. So Romana's going to get into, and I'll finish out with some of these supplemental lifestyle strategies that we can do to support. But like I mentioned, we want to do this simultaneously as we're also supporting some of the liver and gut related things so that you're not having to use these supplements and restrict these foods and be so hyper mindful of these things for the rest of your life. And eventually you can get over to the other side and not have so many histamine related sensitivities.
Enjoy high-quality supplements shipped right to your door with full script through Private Physicians Medical Associates, PPMA. Reap the health benefits of pharmaceutical-grade vitamins while saving 5% on all orders. Set up your free PPMA account today. Visit privatemds.com.
So Romana, maybe you can get into what are some of like the top supplemental things that we can do to support histamine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you kind of taking us through what that might look like, because I know some people might think, well, yeah, allergy season, and that's the only kind of association that they might think of when it comes to histamines, but it can really be much broader than that. And just because you're not sneezing when you go outside doesn't necessarily mean that you might not be dealing with a histamine issue. Now, in terms of helping correct that and supporting that from more of that supplementation lifestyle standpoint, starting with vitamin C can be very helpful. There's a little bit of a catch-22 when it comes to citrus foods being a source of histamines, but if we were to supplement with vitamin C, and a lot of these kind of sinus allergy type herbal supports, a lot of them do include vitamin C already, but vitamin C can help reduce histamine production. So as opposed to blocking our histamine receptors, which is how some antihistamines work, vitamin C actually works to reduce histamine production. And then we also have our nettles. So things like stinging nettle, you can find this both in supplementation form as well as in tea form. Nettles have amazing active compounds to help stabilize our mast cells being the cells in our body that actually work to produce histamines. So they help kind of stabilize or sort of inhibit this mast cell overactivation. And that's how they work to help with that histamine response. So very anti-allergic effects, if you will, helping with histamine stabilization. So again, nettles are available in supplement form, but we really like using them in more of this infusion. So as opposed to just a tea that you're steeping for 5 to 10 minutes, the herbal activity actually is really well activated if you can steep it overnight. So you brew it like a tea, but then you stick it in the refrigerator for at least 8 hours overnight, and then you get a really strong infusion of these powerful antihistamine type molecules, which is really great. So if you can, you can use that in the base of your smoothies or just sip on it all day. Because it's an herbal, it's not going to have any caffeine, so you don't need to worry about having it at any particular time of the day. So doing a nettle tea infusion is always a great recommendation. Some other herbs that you probably have heard of if you've taken any herbal allergy type supplements are bromelain and quercetin. So bromelain is actually an enzyme that comes from pineapple, but it is helpful as an antihistamine. And then quercetin can also be found in a lot of these supplements as well as on its own. But again, it kind of helps prohibit the mast cells from releasing histamines or this like overactivity of the histamine production. So some of these work a little bit differently, others work a little more similarly, but those are some great herbals. So vitamin C, nettles, bromelain, and quercetin. Again, a lot of those you'll find working synergistically in something like a anti-sinus or allergy type of supplement that uses a combination of herbs. But Lauren, what are some others that you use?
Something else that can be helpful is DAO, or diamine oxidase. It's been shown that about 15% of the population is deficient in this enzyme. It's something that's naturally made by our body, but in some individuals, genetically, they're not making enough DAO. And DAO is actually how we break down histamine. It's been found that women tend to have less DAO than do men. So this can be a more problematic situation for women. And so you can actually supplement with DAO. You can take it before each meal or before a high histamine exposure. And it can be really helpful for breaking down that excess histamine. However, we don't want to just break down more histamine, because if the body isn't able to eliminate all that histamine that's broken down, sometimes it can make symptoms worse. And so that's where going back to the importance of what you discussed earlier, Romana, which is making sure that like we're pooping daily, that our liver has everything it needs is so critical, because we want to make sure that that's all open so that as we are supporting more of this histamine breakdown, it's getting safely removed from the body. And so if we need to, we can always start on some drainage support. Drainage is essentially just like how our body eliminates. So we look at like, are you pooping enough? Are you urinating enough? Are you sweating enough? All of these different ways that our body naturally eliminates toxins and detoxifies compounds. We want to make sure that we have support in those areas. So if you're not pooping at least once per day, then we can use some of the strategies you talked about earlier. Definitely making sure that diet is taken care of first and foremost. We're drinking enough water, we're eating enough fiber to support that. And then maybe looking at some supplemental things like the minerals such as magnesium, potassium, aloe vera, and such that you discussed as well. We can also support like the kidneys if we maybe need a little bit more like electrolytes or water intake to be able to help with this process as well. There's certain supplements that can be more targeted for drainage that we can use in this area. But generally speaking, most people respond pretty well to utilizing the minerals and the magnesium and things that we talked about. And that tends to be sufficient to be able to make sure that we are draining properly. And then the last thing is probably my favorite in all of these is nasal irrigation. Nasal irrigation is so helpful for people that deal with ongoing histamine and sinus related issues. There's a lot of different ways that you can perform nasal irrigation. You've probably heard of neti pots before. We touched on this a little bit in our podcast episode with Dr. Oliaei, and there's other options too. Navage is kind of like the Bentley of neti pots out there. So if you don't like doing a typical neti pot where you have to drain through one side and then go through the other, the Navage goes through your nostrils. It like circulates everything and then it comes back down into the unit. And then you just toss all the leftover liquid out into the sink. So it's really nice. However, you can't really control for the amount of saline that's in there. And we talked about this a little bit in that podcast episode, was that some individuals notice when they do these, they get a really large burning sensation. And as Dr. Oliaei mentioned, it can be because maybe there's not enough saline to water. And so you might start off with using the neti pot because with that, you're able to control for the amount of saline. But nasal irrigation is great. I think it's awesome for everyday maintenance. I think it's especially awesome for sinus issue, like sinus related irritation, or if you're noticing an uptick in histamine issues, maybe there's something that you know is a trigger for you, a time of year, a place you travel, a food you ate. It can be a really great way to clear the nasal passages and help reduce this histamine response because as I mentioned earlier, the gut, well, as you mentioned, Romana, the gut is a big driver of this, but so are the nasal passages. So we want to make sure that both areas are being supported. So all in all, there's a lot of things that we can do to support the immune system and support histamine. There's so many conversations that we could have about the immune system because there's so many other angles we could take this, talk about autoimmunity and, other like illnesses and things, cancers and such. But we wanted to really hone in on histamine because I think that this is like an underserved population that maybe this conversation hasn't had enough and that many times people are just told to take an antihistamine. That's really all you can do for this. But we hope that we are able to shed some light on some alternative strategies and some other ways that we could maybe see some like lifelong improvement in some of these histamine related issues. So that's everything that we have for you today in our podcast episode. If you'd love to schedule a nutrition consultation with Romana, you can give the office a call if you're a PPMA patient, and we can get you set up. The office can get you set up to be able to do so. We'll also have a nutrition group education session at the end of this month that I'll be hosting for anyone that is a PPMA patient. If you're not a PPMA patient and you'd like to join our practice, you can go ahead and give the office a call to learn more about how to do so. We will see you guys back in 2 weeks for a new topic and a whole brand new podcast interview. And then again, we'll be continuing that series with a nutrition-based interview 2 weeks later. So thank you so much, guys, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Nourish MD, Dr. Dietitian Dialogues. This podcast is intended for general educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult with your healthcare provider before beginning any nutrition or supplement recommendations. Sign up for our mailing list so you'll never miss an episode of our wellness journey. See the podcast description for the link.